format.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for this webinar presentation this evening. My name is Gareth Dyke, and this is a TopEdit presentation. We are going to be talking this evening about how to avoid English language mistakes and how to identify English language mistakes. So fantastic mistakes and how to avoid them in English. And we certainly hope that some of the insights in this presentation will help you to communicate more effectively in English, because we know that English is probably your second or third or fourth language. And so we also know at TopEdit that it's very difficult, often very problematic for people to write and communicate in English. So my name, as I mentioned, is Gareth. I work in the training department at TopEdit, and I'm an academic researcher. My background is quite extensive in publishing and writing my own academic papers. I'm a paleontologist, that's my background, fossils and dinosaurs, things like that. I've written about 280 of my own academic articles, including in Nature, in Science, in leading international ISI journals with big impact factors, all the rest of it. But I'm also experienced, hopefully, in writing and editing, because I also do work with publishing companies, helping them manage the peer review process and manage journals. So at TopEdit, we edit and manage hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of papers each week. And so we are able to give you some insights, information into what makes a good paper, what is effective English communication, and also what are some of the common mistakes that non-native speakers tend to make when putting together their academic articles. The point is that you don't have to learn blind. You can learn from our experience. You can learn from the mistakes that other people have made over the years. You can stand on the shoulders of other people so you can be more effective as a researcher and as a writer. So this evening, we're going to share with you some of the mistakes in English communication and writing that people often make in our experience. And we're also, to start with this evening, going to talk about effective English communication and how you can enhance and develop your writing skills in English, which I know is difficult. English is difficult to write in, especially if English is not your first language. So we appreciate that. We are here to help. TopEdit is the name of our company. As my colleague was mentioning at the beginning of this presentation, you can share our information. You can engage with our team if you have a need for English language communication, editing services, and other pieces of work that we can do for you to help you be more effective as a researcher. So you're thinking, why should I listen to this presentation today? We are going to talk firstly about English communication and writing skills. And then secondly, we're going to talk about some of the common mistakes that non-native speakers, non-native writers tend to make when putting their articles together, so that you can not make them, hopefully, when you are writing your next article. We will provide you with a recording of this presentation. All of the content in this slide presentation you can use in the future to help you with your English writing. And if you have questions about this content, this presentation, or any other English writing or publishing questions, you can feel free to ask them in the group and we will answer them at the end. There will be plenty of time at the end of this session for a Q&A, for question and answer, to help you to be more effective in your writing and publishing. So let's get started. Let's dive in. Let's get going talking about English communication and writing skills. Effective academic communication. I get letters like this all the time. This one's made up, but we all get letters like this all the time. Thank you for asking whether we at our journal would like to publish your paper. It's good and original, but we're not going to publish it. We're not going to accept it. We're going to reject it. The good bits aren't original and the original bits are not good. Rejection from academic journals happens to us as academics all the time. The question is why? What is it about our technical writing, our technical papers that causes rejection? International publishers often reject our excellent research. We all sit there and think, why has my paper been rejected again? Here's the results on this slide of a publisher survey. So big publishing companies, they control a lot of the academic publishing literature. They control access to lots of academic journals. They know why articles tend to get rejected by editors. And you can see on this list of the top 6 reasons why papers get rejected from journals: English, plagiarism, incorrect formatting, these kinds of issues to do with the presentation of articles are high up in the list. English, indeed, the way that academic papers are written can be a huge, huge issue in the journal publishing process. If a reviewer, or if an editor, or if a reader can't understand the content of your article, they can't understand what is written in the paper, it doesn't matter about the content, the science, the research, the academic writing, the academic content. If the English in an English language submission to an international English language journal is not good enough, it's not understandable enough, then you will have difficulty, unfortunately, getting the paper through initial review, through initial editorial review. So English is often one of the reasons why papers get bounced. And people ask us, why do my papers keep getting bounced? Why do they keep getting rejected? Well, the way that they're written can often be a major contributing factor to rejection. So let's talk about how to manage that. Let's talk about how to communicate effectively in English. It's important, isn't it, that your academic research message is not buried in language issues. We always ask our peer reviewers at our journals, do not comment on the English. If you think there are problems with the language, send the paper back and we will ask the authors to get the paper professionally edited. We will ask the authors to get the paper reread and re-edited by an editing service like TopEdit or by a native speaker. Your message, as you can see on some of these slides that I took off the internet, if you get your message wrong or even slightly wrong in English, perhaps because of punctuation or word choice, as we'll talk about a little bit later on in our webinar this evening, your message does not get across in the way that you intended. So editing and training and understanding how to be effective in English communication can be so very important to ensure that your articles have the best chance possible of being published in your target journals. We know, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, it's good news for people like me who are native speakers, but English has become one of the universal languages of scientific communication. And it's often the case, actually, that academic papers need to be well written, often to a higher standard of English than you might find in your other writing. So Do you enjoy writing? Because the writing process can be as beneficial to future scientific academic work as an intellectual activity in its own right. But people always ask us in workshops, in training courses that we run, how can I do it? How can I write more effectively in English? How can I get over that block? How can I actually be more effective in English? I know it's a tricky question because I also try to write and communicate in my second language, and it's difficult. We understand that, but we hope that in this presentation this evening, we'll give you some simple insights, simple tricks that you can apply, that you can think about to be more effective with your English writing. I want to start doing this in this presentation by introducing you to three of my favorite writers in English. One of which, Winston Churchill, you may have heard about, the former British Prime Minister from the time of the Second World War. The other two, you've almost certainly never heard of before because they're English journalists working for an English newspaper that I like to read. Churchill, let's start with him. You can imagine Churchill was not really a particularly fighting, strong, big guy. Like Churchill, however, managed to mobilize the English language during the war and send it into battle. The American president, John F. Kennedy, said this about Churchill. And if you know something about this man, his way of speaking and his way of writing was inspirational to people in the way that he used the language, the way that he used words. So we'll think about that again in a minute, how you can inspire people, how you can attract their attention with the words, with the way that you write. These other two examples, journalists, both of them, taught me very, very important lessons in my own writing by reading some of the things that they had written themselves. Hadley Freeman, she's a journalist working for an English newspaper, she taught in one of her articles that actually the best way to write in any language is exactly the way that you think. Write down as you think in that language, in English or in your own native language, and then edit later. Write down as the words come, as you think in that language. The best way to write is exactly the way that you think. This is very, very good advice, especially, as you'll see in a minute, if you're trying to write in a second or third language, as I know that you guys are listening to this presentation. My third example, another travel writer, he was so dyslexic that he was actually unable to write himself. All of his writing, and it's very good, it's very engaging, it's very funny actually, was recorded into a dictaphone. He spoke everything that he wrote down, and then it was transcribed using software, using dictation. So you don't need to actually write anything to be able to be a successful writer. As this illustration shows, think and write and try to be inspiring, try to use words, try to use the language to get people's attention, get people interested in what you have to say as a researcher. How do you manage that though? People ask us, I'm faced with writing an assignment, I've got to write a document, I feel very afraid. How do you feel when you have to write a piece of English language as a document? How do you do it? How do you think about these kinds of processes? What kind of writer are you? Very important to think about this. This is a training technique that academic writers, writing coaches use. Think about the kind of way in which you approach these kinds of tasks. Are you a bricklayer like Arnold? Do you need to put together bits of the text in a certain sequence? Are you an architect? Do you need a plan before you do anything like me? Are you a sketcher? Do you put down lots of little notes and little sketches before you start to think about writing the big picture? In a second language, in a language that's not your native language, when you start to write, you need a plan. and you need a structure. You will not be successful if you just try to write. You can think about your structure, and that's what our training is all about. That's what some of the other training courses and webinars that we provide deal with. You need a plan. You need a structure for your writing. And of course, we can learn a lot from the writers who have come before us. We can see, as you'll see in a minute in this presentation, later in this presentation, the typical kinds of mistakes, the typical kinds of problems that non-native speakers often make when writing in English. So we hope that this will help you, this kind of thing. The key message of this presentation so far, up to now, is before you start to write, develop a structure. And don't be afraid of putting down words on the page as you think in English. And that's a key thing to think about, a key message to take away from the first part of this presentation. Because people ask us, how can I write in English? English is not my first language. How can I even do that? How's that even possible? I can relate to this, of course, because I'm trying to learn to write in my second language. And here are some tricks that people will tell you, that coaches, that writing teachers will give you. Try to think in English when you have to write something in English, and write, as my friend Hadley Freeman on the previous slide taught me, write as you think. Don't worry too much about which words, the punctuation, the grammar. Write it down as you think, and you can edit it later. And please try to do this a little bit and often. So try to think in English and write in English little and often, even for 5 minutes, 10 minutes each day, because as you build up that experience, as you build up that content, as you start to think about what you're doing and how your work comes together, just a small amount of time each day will be very valuable as you practice writing in another language. And top tip, number one tip, work with papers in your field that you like and respect, that have been written by other academics, that have been written by other colleagues from around the world, preferably native speakers, so you can see in those papers how other people put together the shape, the structure, and present their work. There will be a number of articles in your academic field that you use a lot in your work, that you use all the time for your own research. You use them, you cite them, you read them, you refer to them. They're written by native speakers, perhaps. Look at those papers and see how the style, the writing, the structure, and the presentation are fitted together. And also, I want to say at this point in this presentation, if you translate your work into English, please, 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 please use a subject area specialist translator. We can connect you at TopEdit with translators who are experts in your particular subject area, because as you know, if you machine translate or you get your work translated into English by somebody that doesn't know your subject area, a lot of the content gets lost. Academic writing can be so specific to particular subject areas, the way that words are used, the way that structures are put together. So if you need to translate, please use a subject area specialist. So thinking about what plain English is, what is effective English communication, people, commentators, trainers, people like me that teach English writing have identified 6 features of plain English. And you're in a good position, because actually plain English and your native language are quite similar. Short sentences, no unnecessary words. Be familiar to the readers. Use words that people understand. Be active in your writing rather than passive, which is a question that I'm sure somebody's going to ask. We're going to talk about this in the Q&A a little bit later. Style and punctuation. Short sentences. Keep it simple. English, as a communication tool, as a written language, is much more effective in the active, short, simple, familiar form. And you will see this if you look at papers in leading international English journals, Nature, Science, for example. The way that they're written is actually quite informal, and the way that they're written is often quite simple. So these are things to definitely keep in mind when doing your own writing, putting your own work together. So some basic ideas about effective language communication skills for you in English. Avoid those long words, long sentences, and passive voice. We conclude rather than it can be concluded that. I did, we did, our team did. First person active voice. Limit your sentences to one or two ideas. Topic sentences, this is called, the technique is called writing using a topic in each sentence. So one or two complex ideas maximum in each sentence. And keep them short. Average 20 words. Don't be long. Don't be long-winded. Don't be over the top with the way that you put your writing together. And as I mentioned already, you're in good shape because in your native language, I understand that this is how you write anyway. So it's not like some other languages, Russian, French, for example, where people are told, be complicated, use long words. It'll make you look better. English, Chinese, similar in the way that people tend to use short, simple, easy to understand phrases. Cut out those unnecessary adjectives. We're going to come back to that in a minute. Avoid the jargon. Use short and simple words. And don't use double negatives. Double negatives are actually very common in people's writing, but you can cut them out, okay, by thinking about the structure of your sentences. Another topic that we're going to come back to and talk about in a moment. So let's move on and start to talk about some of the most common mistakes that people make in English. We've talked so far in this presentation about how to communicate, how to write, how to communicate, and some ideas for you about how to be more effective in your English writing as a communicator. Now we're going to switch and start to learn about what people usually do, often do, when they write as a non-native speaker. Here are the most common mistakes that people make. And often they're not mistakes, actually. They're just things that people tend to do when writing in a second language, when writing in English as it's not their first language, that makes it more difficult for people to understand what they're saying. The first one, plagiarism, we'll talk about in a minute, but that's often, almost always, happening by mistake in English writing, in academic writing. Authors are unaware of what plagiarism is. They're unaware of how they should be citing the work of other authors, and they don't take advantage of services such as the ones that we provide at TopEdit to check documents before they get sent to journals to make sure there's no problem with the incorrect citation of the work of others. Talking about actual specific language mistakes, though, tenses and switches within sentences can be very confusing. People also often make mistakes with spelling conventions. As you may very well be aware, there's quite a lot of differences between English, British English, the kind of English that I speak, of course, and American English, the kind of English that our friends across the Atlantic would be speaking and using. So also inappropriate word use and word use confusion can also cause problems in the understanding of documents, in the way that documents are put together. So in the second half of this presentation today, we're going to take a little bit of time to think in more detail about these different kinds of quote unquote mistakes. And I put the word mistakes in quotes because, of course, they're not really mistakes. No one's saying that anyone's doing anything wrong. It's just that often people are unaware of what's expected by international journals, and also they're unaware in their writing that there's actually a simpler way to put it. There's a simpler way to write something so that people can more easily understand. We're going to start this section then by talking about academic plagiarism. If you understand what this is, you can easily avoid plagiarizing inadvertently by mistake without realizing it the work of others. This basically means that you're taking somebody else's ideas, words, processes, figures, data, and using them in your work without giving appropriate credit. Appropriation means using or taking something that you didn't create yourself. So stealing is a big word, but plagiarism means that citations in your work are lacking. Something has come from the work of another author and it's not been appropriately cited. So we are expected to do this when we submit work to academic journals. It can be really important, and keep in mind, please, that at the big international journals, at the publishing companies, they're sitting there behind their desks and they're looking at the country of origin of work that gets submitted to their journals. And they're thinking, aha, this paper has been submitted from a non-native speaking country. So we are going to send this article, this Word document, this PDF, into a plagiarism checking service, a piece of software, an online tool that checks against literature databases, Web of Science, Scopus, for example, to see which bits, if any, of text in this paper have been rewritten from other articles and haven't been cited. This is the number one, I can't emphasize that enough, the number one reason for initial desk rejection at international journals. Somebody sends a paper to a journal, the journal editor looks at that paper, they see that the country of origin is not a native speaking country, they check for plagiarism and the document fails a plagiarism check. We'll talk about what that means in a minute, but you can easily avoid this happening because we can provide you with plagiarism checking services. You can get your documents pre-checked before you send them to journals to make sure that all of the text in your article has been cited. And it happens all the time and people just don't realize it. I do it myself in my second language. I read something in my second language, Hungarian, and I think, well, that sounds good. And so without thinking, the next time I have to write something, I use that exact wording, that exact phrase, because it gets stuck in your head. You don't cite, you get in trouble with those international journals. Plagiarism is an issue in the academic environment and beyond. This is the use of somebody else's work without crediting the source. And it can, of course, harm your academic credibility quite seriously in some cases, because most of the publishing industry, the academic publishing industry, is controlled by a few big publishing companies. So if I send a paper to a Wiley journal or a Taylor and Francis journal or an Elsevier journal or a Springer Nature journal and it fails a plagiarism check, I could then get myself banned, blacklisted from submitting to any of the journals in that particular publishing family. So it's well worth getting yourself checked, your papers checked before you put them into the submission system. So I think people are often unaware of what plagiarism is. And indeed, the most common kind of plagiarism that academic authors do not know is a problem is called self-plagiarism. Did you know, for example, that if you publish a paper this year and you want to reuse one of the figures or some of the data or some of the text in a later paper that you might write next year, you actually have to cite yourself. Many authors are unaware of this. They think, I've written the paper, I've made the figure, I own that. I can use that again whenever I want. No, you have to cite yourself. It's academic convention to do so, to tell your readers that this is not actually an original figure. It was previously published by Dyke in 2010. The source, right? So self-plagiarism can be a big problem simply because authors are unaware that it's something that they have to do. And also, by the way, often, especially if you submit your articles to a traditional non-open access journal, you very often don't own the copyright anymore. So if you submit a paper to a journal, you may sign a copyright declaration form that gives the publisher copyright over the contents, which means that you sometimes actually have to ask permission from the publisher to reuse one of your own figures in one of your own papers. It's crazy, but it's true. Self-plagiarism, use of a data set from a previous study without making your readers aware of it, submitting a manuscript for publication that you've already published, or indeed publishing multiple similar papers about the same study in different journals. At least I ask you to be aware of this issue. The second major problem that many authors have with English academic writing is which tense to use in which section. And this slide, very simple, basically summarizes for you what you should be doing. The present tense in the whole of the paper, apart from the method section. This is a very simple way of thinking about it. It works. It's a simple rule for you to be able to effectively do this. The only part of your paper that you should write in the past tense is the method section, because that bit happened in the past. You collected the data, you analyzed the data, and then you performed your analyses. You have to think about your readers. Somebody picking up one of your papers, downloading it, and starting to read it is experiencing your work in that moment, at that time, as they read the articles. So you have to give them an experience in that moment. So the introduction, this is happening now. The results, this is happening now. You're reporting it to the reader right now. The discussion as well, in the moment, in the present tense. This is very simple, very easy to understand. But let me tell you, one of the biggest confusing things about reading academic papers is that people often mix the tenses between the different sections. They'll write in different parts of the paper with a range of different tenses. This is one of the big, not mistakes, but big problems that we get when looking at papers for editing. It can really affect understanding if you don't follow these simple rules. Spelling conventions also trip authors up all the time. Check your journal. Check your target journal. Have a look at the author's instructions, please, because so many authors don't bother to do that. They just send the paper in with any old spelling. And most journals, most academic journals actually say, we want papers submitted in American English, or we want papers submitted in British English, or we don't care, just be consistent. And it's not being consistent that drives editors, readers up the wall. You know, different spellings between different conventions, and you need to be consistent. If you pick American English, be consistent throughout your document, throughout your paper. Make sure you've got all of the spellings correct. And by the way, your spell checker will not catch all of them. My personal favorite, did you know that there's a spelling difference between American English and British English in the use of the word grey? I didn't know that until very recently. Also, some differences in the use of tenses. Lots and lots and lots of information available about this online, but be consistent in your use of tenses, as we talked about a moment ago, and in your use of spelling conventions in your document. And please Don't make the mistake that so many authors make. Check those instructions for authors. I bet you that they say, we want this particular spelling convention or that particular spelling convention. So let's move on and talk a bit about word use. And we're going to present in detail some more of this material in future presentations that we do. And if you'd like to join us, we're running a boot camp, a training program, an academic writing and publishing training program that you can sign up for right now. You can get in touch with our team, the TopEdit team. You can join us for an intensive English writing, communication and publishing boot camp. Be like in the army, you know, we'll teach you over a short period of time how to be effective. One of the other big mistakes, one of the other big issues that we find in articles written by non-native speakers is inappropriate word use, emotional words, superlative words, and words that qualify the absolute. So, for example, emotional, inappropriate words like reckless, crank, sound good. You know, this sounds good. This hypothesis sounds good. Like, you will read yourself in lots of academic papers word use that sounds inappropriate. I edited a paper recently written by some colleagues that actually said the government should not let the grass grow under its feet when it comes to the issue of antimicrobial resistance. So where's the inappropriate word use, the informal word use in that example? Superlatives, very commonly used by academic writers, non-native speakers, but they sound out of place. Gigantic, earth-shattering, magnificent, marvelous, fantastic. And be careful with your adjectives. Some adjectives in English cannot be modified. Something is either unique or it's not. Something is either sterile or it's not. Other ones, like pregnancy, very good example, has to be qualified with care in your writing, because somebody can be recently pregnant, but they can't be slightly pregnant. And have a look at some of the examples on this slide and on the other slides in this presentation when you think about writing your next article, because I hope that some of this will help you. Word use, dangling modifiers, pronoun antecedent problems. You always know as an author, as a writer, exactly what you mean. You always know what you mean, but do you get that meaning across to the reader? And this is a key issue and a key take-home message from this presentation. You have to think about your readers, you have to think about your editors, your peer reviewers, and make sure that there's no problems in the understanding of your writing. So here are a few examples that are difficult to understand. The authors knew what they meant, but when you read these sentences, it's not necessarily clear exactly what is meant. And indeed, in some of these examples, you can get some quite confusing, misleading, or even funny results when you think about how misplaced and pronoun antecedent problems can actually happen in academic writing. This is my personal favorite language problem that we get when we're editing documents. And this is the use of verbal, what are called obscurantisms, obscure words. Be simple, as we've talked about before. Keep it simple in your writing, because phrases like this actually give the reader the impression that you don't really know what you're talking about. So very common ones seen here on this slide. These are switching words that link sentences that people often use when they link sentences together. However, nevertheless, indeed, meanwhile, and at the same time, and my absolute favorite, which is used all the time by a good friend of mine who's French, writing in English, but his first language is French. He very often starts his sentences by saying, "Be that as it may," comma, and then continuing with the sentence. These words are unnecessary because you can delete them from the sentence and the sentence still makes perfect sense. In fact, the sentence is better without these kinds of words. So be careful that you try not to use them in your own writing. And also phrases like, "it has long been known that," means that the writer has not really bothered to look up the reference. "Correct to an order of magnitude" probably means the answer was wrong. "Almost reached significance at the 5% level" usually means a selective interpretation of results. Be careful about the impression that you give to your readers with the way that you write. Confusion abounds, and redundant words in English are very common, especially when the text is written by non-native speakers. So have a think about how you use words like that and which. The lawnmower which is broken is in the garage. The lawnmower that is broken is in the garage next to the one that works. And I love this, redundant words. We get them all the time in editing work. People say things like, "this is small in size," "rectangular in shape," "that man is blue in color." This argument is tenuous in nature. There's no need for these extra words. I could just say it's small, it's rectangular, it's blue, he's blue. Your argument is tenuous. This is something also to think about, because often, of course, your academic papers have a word limit. You know, you might be writing a paper for a journal that tells you you can only use 1,500 words in the paper. A Nature paper, for example, will only have about 1,500 to 2,000 words. So don't waste your words. Think about how you're putting your work together, and don't use redundant expressions. Clear writing techniques are important. Signal your question. Be consistent in the order in which you introduce information. Repeat those key terms. Maintain a consistent viewpoint in your article. Be clear about what your message is. Constantly reinforce that to readers through the text, and be parallel with your ideas. And we've talked about topic sentences. We'll talk about them again in other presentations and in a minute, but each sentence needs to contain one key idea. That's the basis for clear, simple writing. We can certainly help you. We can certainly give you access to lots of resources, additional ideas, additional texts that you can have a look at in your writing, but you need to make sure your reader knows what the question is that your article is addressing. Set up an expectation in your papers for the rest of the article or the grant. This is also very important if you have to write a research grant. Be clear from the beginning what you're talking about. Give the reader questions that you then answer with your writing. Here are some practical tips that you can have a look at when you look at this presentation later. I'm not going to read out all of this text. We put it in so that you can use it when you have to put together a piece of writing in the future. The most common issue, one of the most common issues that we get all the time in our editing work is, of course, use of the word data. This is plural. The data were collected. Avoid direct quotes in your writing, and don't forget to read your references. So many authors submitting articles to international journals have not actually read the references that they cite at the end of their papers. So they set themselves up to fail with peer reviewers because the reviewers have read the references. You may be unlucky enough to cite a paper incorrectly because you haven't read it, and then that author, the author of that paper, turns out to be one of your peer reviewers. So review your writing, and we can help you with this as well. Sentence construction and word choice. We've talked about this quite extensively in this presentation this evening. The purpose of your articles is to convey information and ideas. This can't be done with long sentences. They need to contain one or at most two related ideas. And your word choice has to be precise, because words in any language have precise meanings. And so using your words correctly adds clarity and precision. And we have some examples for you here that you can have a look at later. But, the choice of which of these pairs of words can be important in getting your meaning across. Use of pronouns, correct spelling, including the use of plurals. We've talked about also in this presentation how English words are pluralized can also be important, how they're spelt, apparent misspellings or misuses of particular words. Don't worry, this content is content that we're going to give to you so that you can look at in your own time. If you have questions about any of this, we can answer those questions. Use of abstract words, present participles. We will translate also all of this content for you if that's something that you would like to have access to. And we will be presenting in the future a series of additional webinar presentations on the specifics of English writing. So if you want, or if you are motivated to sign up for our academic bootcamp, our writing and training bootcamp, that would also be something that you can do to get ahead, to get access to all of our great content, all of our great training materials in effective writing. Other mistakes that people make, often around punctuation. Do you know how to effectively use colons, semicolons, and commas in English writing? Because lots of people don't do that. Lots of people don't do it correctly in their writing. So here's some information that you can refer to later. Have a look at the correct way to use these items of punctuation. So let's have a read of some of these practical tips for academic writing before we switch into our Q&A. And these are jokes, so we don't want questions, we don't want comments saying there's spelling mistakes, there's problems with this kind of stuff. It's supposed to be a bit of fun at the end of the presentation. Remember, be more or less specific. Avoid those cliches like the plague, their old hat. Verbs has to agree with their subjects. Prepositions are not words to end sentences with. And don't start a sentence with a conjunction. Is it wrong to ever split an infinitive? Parenthetical remarks, however relevant, are usually unnecessary. Also, never, ever use repetitive redundancies. No sentence fragments. Contractions aren't good style and shouldn't be used in formal writing. Do not be redundant. Do not use more words than necessary. One should never generalize. One-word sentences, eliminate. Eliminate commas that are not necessary. And never use a big word when a diminutive one would suffice. Kill those exclamation points. Use words correctly, irregardless of how others use them. Understatement is always the absolute best way to put forth earth-shaking ideas. Use apostrophes in its proper pace and omit it when it's not needed. And who needs those rhetorical questions? And finally, ladies and gentlemen, proofread your work carefully to see if you left any words out. We can help. We're here to edit, language polish, get your work up to the standard that you can get your work published in those leading international journals as a researcher. We have talked about these common mistakes in English: plagiarism, tenses and switches, spelling conventions, and inappropriate word use and confusing word use. If you remember a few things from this presentation, I hope that you will remember some of the tips that we've given you about English communication, how you can be more effective in your writing, and also a few of the common mistakes, the common errors that non-native speakers tend to make in their writing. And we know about this because we edit at TopEdit hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles each week. So we're good people to comment on the kinds of mistakes that non-native speakers tend to make. You, of course, have a great advantage because we're sharing all this information with you, and you can use it, you can stand on the shoulders of those who've come before you, and you can learn not to make the same mistakes much more easily than other people who've been working and writing in a non-native language, in English, in the past. So thank you so much for listening. My name is Gareth Dyke. This has been a TopEdit training presentation, a training webinar, and we are now ready for any questions. So I'm going to hand back over to my good friend and colleague, and we're going to turn the floor open to you guys if you have any questions or comments about this presentation. Thank you so much once again.
Okay, thank you, Gareth. 好，小伙伴们，大家好。现在我们的Gareth 刚讲完，讲了我们大概有50分钟左右。刚才我还看到有一位我们的小伙伴说，在群里面说我直接退了，反正听不懂。他已经听到最后了，已经很好了，很不错了。这个问题我们是每次戴老师做报告，我们每次也都强调一下。确实是我们直接请一个外教过来。对咱们这个有一部分人，这个咱们的朋友肯定会听着会有一些吃力，但是我们这个分2部分吧，就是我们也会做好，咱们投币德这边会做好我们的这个准备，我们包括让戴老师他讲课慢一点，包括我们以前的 PPT 也都会翻译一下，这次的 PPT 没有翻译是因为它信息量太大了。包括有很多单词，我们比如说用法之类的也没办法翻译。还有就是我们的录播课程，鉴于这次有很多人都说听着比较吃力，我们这次录播课程会答应大家，我们会把中英字幕都放上去，所以大家在听回播的时候，就会有中英字幕。有个小伙伴说，这个视频讲的非常好，谢谢。我们还是对，但是可能你听的比较好，我们可能我刚才看留言，可能更多被那些听不懂的小伙伴给吸引了。反正我们就是会还是鼓励大家吧。第一方面是我们做好准备，第二方面就是还是鼓励大家就是这个多听，你哪怕就是把这个当成英语听力呗，那你能学几个点就是几个点，比如说刚才说的这些那个用哪些单词，不用哪些单词，那你最起码先学几个点，然后同时把听力练好。我们戴老师已经在咱们这边这是第3次还是第4次直播了，你多听几次，尤其是听一个人，你多听几次，肯定就会有很大的提高的，会有很大效果的。接下来呢，就是我们鼓励大家用英语，如果你刚才的问题这个你刚才在听的过程当中有什么问题的话，我们鼓励大家那个用英语来把这些问题发出来，发到咱们的这个留言区，然后我们会把你的问题 copy 给戴老师，由他待会儿用英语来回答。我肯定就先挑一些就是一些跟技术上可能就是偏技术的问题，我给大家回答一些。我突然看那个后面请老师帮忙润色论文，这个没问题，这个我们能帮你润色论文的老师有一大把，我们这个欢迎联系我们的客服。然后我刚才看到还有说，这次讲座好多细节没有讲，这个是肯定的，这个是咱们这个也是咱们投币德的一个特色。算是一个好的优势，就是我们做直播不是就给做一场报告就算了，我们像这个系列肯定至少会有2到3次直播，然后还会有相配套的课程，真的是想学习的，想提高这个英语写作的，我们肯定是鼓励你去买我们的课程。等以后在课程当中，我们至少会有10几节、几十节的课程在那边，尤其是我们的课程里边会有建群，戴老师会在群里边每天回答。我们目前开的一个课程是论文写作，是偏介绍写作技巧，但不是偏语言方面的，我们已经开了。等接下来我们会开这个英语偏语言方面的，所以说到时候想多学的可以去那边去学。然后我 然后我说几个问的比较多的问题。首先说拿到课件肯定是可以拿，咱们的客服会给大家留方式拿课件。然后另外一个就是咱们在宣传这次课的时候，答应过大家给一套这个总结的资料。其实这个资料也都是从我们过往2年多推广的一些非常好的文章，推送的一些非常好的文章给大家总结出来，大家拿到以后你就知道了，肯定非常有用。当然我们目前还是一个比较初级的版本，排版上可能还不能让所有人都特别满意。我们等以后力争是把这些排版把它做成电子书的形式，做成小册子的形式，到时候我们会给大家再次的分享。这次就是我们时间有限，我们就先把Word 文档把它导成PDF， 先给大家分享，大家可以先看。总共里边有11篇，有好几十页的，都是总结的单词词组，大家可以去看。看看还有问题吗？貌似还蛮多的。我说几个咱们这里边的问题吧。这里边有的小伙伴说到这个时态的问题，这个时态问题我们在训练营里边，我们目前有一个训练营，里边也讨论过很多次了。首先从我的观点来说，我们跟戴老师也讨论过这个问题，就是这个英语写作时态，你们肯定也看到过很多其他的，包括戴老师讲的这肯定也不是绝对的。就是你比如说在 introduction 里边，一般我们是建议用，包括一般人也都会用一般现在时态，但是我们肯定也会经常看到说previous studies found that 怎么样，你肯定那也有用过去时态的嘛，我们说以前的研究人员发现了什么，那我们一般就是用 found， 所以说这个都不是绝对的。但是戴老师给大家讲的是什么呢？是这一部分它整体的作为这一部分，它应该就是属于哪种论述，相当于就比如说那 results， 我们就是说那肯定属于，尤其是我们等以后还会讲，我们一般现在戴老师推荐，包括 Nature Science 上一般都是用第一人称的方式再开始写文章了。以前旧的 old version old teaching 都会教你用被动语态，但现在我们一般都是用现在语态，就是用主动的方式来写。we 怎么样 ，we find 怎么样？像你用这种方式写的时候，那在 results 里边，我们一般就要用一般现在时态就比较多了。那就是说，我们的结果 indicate 怎么样？像这个都是不是一成不变的，而且呢，也是大家多看多听，你就会知道。就是这个我们不能说别人就一定错，但是呢，你如果能抓住戴老师讲的这个精髓的话，你就会知道这才是就是最符合逻辑以及最符合我们目前书写习惯的这么一种方式。OK， 好，哇，我们这次讨论的真的是蛮激烈的，我们待会儿看一看。我问问我们客服，大家稍等一下，因为大家问题挺多，我们会把问题给粘贴给戴老师，我们让他也挑一些回答吧。我们可能有很多问题，等以后咱们大家在群里边可以讨论，或者说是我们在公众号也会结合大家的问题来，我们写一些推送文章。总之就是我们鼓励大家，就是说，既然咱们投币得做的就都是论文写作方向的培训也好，课程也好，直播也好，我们是希望大家你要多学才可以，不要指着来一次直播课好像就能提高了，或者说就会了。这个真的是很多东西写作就是需要练的，这是经验是占主要部分。你哪怕是你今天你懂了，我说给你了，应该用一般现在时态，你写的时候你不一定能记住，你写的时候也不一定能写出来。好吧，我们刚才我收到信息，戴老师那儿稍微还需要再有1-2分钟准备一下，这1-2分钟我这儿也退出我的微信了，我就跟大家讲一下，就是我们前边我们的客服把这个小额通的就是大家 从刚才这个小鹅通二维码进来的时候，你如果点击其他的地方，我也不知道再点击哪儿了，你就会看到咱们小鹅通的首页，首页当中其实有咱们TopEdit以前所做过的20-30次的直播课程的录播视频，所以说大家可以去里边这个可以看那个我们以前做过的直播录播，然后相信可以帮助大家很多。好，我今天就说到这边，在这个我们在宣传的时候也答应大家，我们要给大家发奖。这个呢，我现在呢就是抽小红包奖，我们肯定还会抽，在公众号会释放。但我们今天在现场呢，我来给大家发10个优惠券，这优惠券也就10来块钱的小优惠券，就是咱们小鹅通的优惠券。等以后我们有这个，就刚才我介绍的那些课程，等以后你就可以用这些优惠券来买，只有10个，待会儿大家想抢就有需要的就赶紧去抢，我现在来发一下。为什么我这儿没找到了呢？来，我给大家找一下。哦，今天这个不好意思，我们这个优惠券现在我在后台现在没有找到，我们就还是我们就在下来直接抽奖吧。这个接下去我们看一看是什么情况。行，那接下来我们就来交给公众号是哪个，可以分享一下吗？有个人问。这个是对我们就把二维码就发一下吧。我们的公众号是投币得学术这个公众号，大家也可以搜一下。我们就开始，我跟 Gareth 那边联系一下，给大家来回答问题。Hello, Gareth.
Hello, how are you? How's it going?
Did you receive any of the questions?
Yeah, we've gotten a great number of questions. It's fantastic.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you, everybody.
Maybe you can select some. If you think it's too many, you can select.
Well, as expected, and as I had predicted in the presentation, many of the questions are about the use of tenses in academic writing, because this is very, very, very controversial, and we always get questions about this. The first thing to say to everybody is that there's no right way or wrong way to do this. And many people have been taught different things depending on their training, depending on their background, who their professors were, what kinds of writing training they've had in the past. The number one thing to keep in mind when writing your articles is to be consistent in your use of tenses. So if you decide, for example, to use a certain tense in the results section, that's fine. There's no right way to do this. The way that I described to you is just what I think is the clearest and most effective way to put the paper together. But if you disagree or you want to write in a different style, that's awesome. That's totally fine. Just be consistent and don't mix up in the same section those different tenses. If you go and look at a recent issue of Nature, for example, you go and have a look at all the papers that were published in Nature this week, I bet you that you will find about half of them written in the first person, active, and half of them written in the third person, but they don't mix the active, the first person, the past tense, the present tense, between different sections. So, in the questions that we have, people are asking, many published articles use the past tense in the results. Of course, that's fine, but in order to be effective as possible, and as clear as possible, you might try the next time you have to write an article to look at that slide that we showed you about this and try to keep everything apart from the methods section in the present tense and see if that makes the writing any easier. Somebody else is asking about searching for literature, which is an interesting question. I can't find the most useful articles in my field. I don't know if you can provide me with some good methods to search the literature. Well, in my opinion, one of the best ways to search the literature is to look in the reference lists of other people's papers. So assemble literature, you will have a number of articles that you use every day in your own research. You can look at the reference lists in those articles and start digging through the reference lists of the articles in those reference lists and go deeper and deeper, like down the rabbit hole, and find articles for yourself and actually read them, find them, print them out, look at them on your computer and actually have a read of these articles. That's the best way to start to put together a comprehensive review, a comprehensive literature review in your field. So those are some of the questions that we've gotten asked this evening. Should I continue, or that's enough for now?
Yeah, so you have already answered all questions? Good.
No, there's lots of questions. There's lots of questions. There's more, like
so maybe you can answer another three. Yeah, we don't have that many time, but yeah, we can answer another three.
So someone is asking about the limitation number on long sentences used in articles. And generally speaking, long sentences are to be avoided in English, as we've talked about in this presentation. And a general rule of thumb to keep in mind is around 20 words is enough to express what you want to say in a particular sentence. So around about 20 words would be a rule of thumb, like a benchmark for the number of words in a particular sentence. And another question is about why do we avoid using question words in articles? The answer to this is that you need to be 100% clear in your writing about what your opinion is as the author. Don't leave any room for doubt in the reader's mind, in the reviewer's mind, that what you're saying is what you believe in as an author. So that's why we say to avoid ambiguous words that might leave some room for doubt, some question words in the article. Be clear. Don't leave your readers in any doubt about what you think the answer to your question is, and about things like your opinion of previous studies, let's say. I have a question about self-plagiarism. We submitted an abstract to an international conference and the results were published in an open abstract book. If we use these data to write and submit a journal article, will it be identified as self-plagiarism? I think that you can cite the abstract book. There's always a way to cite, even if it's just putting like the URL and the link to the place that you downloaded the information from. It's always better, if possible, to cite rather than not cite. So if this is an abstract that was not peer-reviewed, if it's an abstract that was published just on a website, for example, and there's no ISSN number for the publication, there's no journal that you can cite with a volume and page number for that abstract, then why not just put the website link? Many people do that. They put the website link and they put accessed on July the 4th, 2020. So this is also something to keep in mind. It's absolutely okay to do that, but at least when you do that, you're showing the editor, showing the reviewers that you are making the effort to cite the work of other people. So I think that's important to keep in mind. We have a question about, can we please introduce a few books about writing skills? Absolutely. We have lots of resources that we can give you. I would say please get in touch with the TopEdit team. We'll send you some PDFs. We'll send you some examples of books, PDFs that you can have a look at to be more effective as an English writer. And of course, my best advice in this area is to sign up for our academic writing publishing bootcamp training program. So my colleagues will get in touch with you afterwards, talk to you about how you can do that. You can join us, get daily top tips, get daily content, get 2 video presentations each week as we take you through the journey of writing and publishing your academic work. How's that?
Good, good. Okay. I think we will be here, Gareth. So,所以大家我们就是接下来我们还有很多想分享的，或者说有很多问题，我们也是还是想跟大家说，但是呢，我们时间有限，让 Gareth 就先回答到这边，他也讲了1个多小时了，我们也让他休息一下，然后打了个盹 ，OK 我们刚才这个优惠券也已经发完了，看来领的好像蛮快的，我就发上来5秒钟，我点击就说领取失败了。感谢大家对咱们投币德的这个支持。等以后我们不光是 Gareth， 然后我们还会请以前的一些刘教授还有其他的老师给咱们多讲一讲在论文写作、语言方面、技巧方面以及结构方面，我们都来多讲一讲。我们也希望小伙伴们可以一直的，就是我们鼓励大家，就是你要多听整个系列，而不是说今天就听这么一节学一点，然后明天又换一个。还是大家要抓住，既然大家现在都是在家里，有的也是做实验也做不了，抓住这段时间，多学一些这些东西，我们相信对大家肯定是有帮助的。然后最后我来说一个小通知，就是明天我个人还是会在这个直播间，当然二维码就不是这个了，大家如果可以在关注我们的群里边，也可以关注咱们公众号，前几天也发过推文，就是明天的9点。晚上9点也是，我会有一个小型的讨论会，就是跟大家讨论选择期刊以及关于最近这个期刊影响因子出来以后有哪些值得可看的地方，我会跟大家来讨论，大家有时间可以过来参加，尤其是我也会结合咱们投币德开发的一些期刊选择的产品，期刊平台，包括我们新建了一个期刊的公众号，都会给大家来说怎样在咱们投币德这边对期刊选择方面，对期刊的认识方面有一个更好的提升，欢迎大家明天来捧场。我们明天主要是以讨论为主，所以人不多不要紧，关键就是明天想跟大家好好的来讨论一下。行，我们今天的直播大概就到这里，然后我们接下来Gareth 的这个讲语言课肯定至少直播还得有2次，然后我们的课程也在开发过程当中，在下一次直播的时候，我们应该也就会把课程也就会挂上来了，有兴趣的小伙伴到时候我们一起来学习。好，今天呢我们就到这边。也是非常感谢有小伙伴说很受用很有用，我们非常感谢大家的这些正面的回馈，这些对于我们来说，对于 Gareth 来说都是很好的一个反馈，我们就这个非常感谢大家。最后就是关于抽奖，我们会在公众号这个来公布，我们就今天到这里，拜拜。